And I'm the director of ACT for Social Justice, and we're a collaborative of folks that do workshops and presentations on issues of inequality, and we work a lot on what are the assumptions that are getting in the way of relationships and making social change. We also do a lot on the connection of race and class, and yeah, hunger has been something that's been really important to me since I was a young girl. I remember when I was about 10, my family was on a trip to Washington, D.C., and we were at a park, and there were a lot of homeless people in the park, and a man, I remember him being dressed in burlap sacks, came up to my family and asked for food. And I remember, I don't know if it was my parents or myself handing him an orange. And I knew something was really wrong, that there were people that were so hungry, that they were having to come up and ask my family for food. And since that time, I've done a lot of work on issues of hunger as a volunteer in food shelves, soup kitchens, homeless shelters, and also as a social worker. I studied social work and worked for about a decade as a social worker. And really, hunger it's a painful issue that just goes on and on, despite all this work that we're all doing to address it. And so a lot of what I have worked on in the last decade is what is causing this? What's causing this, and how can we do things differently to begin to impact real change? And so that when we're giving that orange to someone, we're doing it out of solidarity, not just charity, not just an act of giving, but that act of giving is so much more. We're connected, right? Our struggle is connected, and our freedom is also connected. So that's why I'm here today, to talk about what I've learned really throughout my life, but in particular in the last decade. And my lovely husband.
Hi, so I'm Richard Burkfield. I am the co-founder and executive director of Food Connects. We're a nonprofit organization based in the Brattleboro area. We've been around for about 3 years, but we started work under a different organization for about 5 years before that. So for roughly the last 8 years, I've been doing some work essentially monkeying with the local food system in the Brattleboro area. We have a pretty robust local food system in the Brattleboro area, and we have a pretty robust food bank and food shelf system happening in the Brattleboro area. And so what we were trying to do under Post Oil Solutions is connect them and figure out ways that local food could be for all local people. So we've been doing a lot of work around a variety of activities, ranging from helping to start the gleaning program at the food bank, to organized cooking classes, to starting what we had called equitable food buying clubs. Really basically low-income type farmers markets. And throughout the 8 years, we've been kind of using a social change approach, where we would try something. We would get our best ideas together and engage people and try something with the intention of learning from that, and then adapting from what we've learned, and trying again, trying something new. So as an organization, now Food Connects is really focused on some of the leverage points that we've learned about and that we've seen, and also some of the gaps where we don't have activities happening. So for example, we've got a very strong food bank and network in our area, so that's an area that we don't need to be working in. So we've been focused on farm to school, working on food farm and nutrition education in 30 schools, and working on improving meal quality and meal participation in the cafeteria. And we've also been doing some hands-on learning through a small farm that we have near the Brattleboro High School, and growing food for the cafeteria to use. And then we've been working on a couple other initiatives as well, and really looking at ways that we can also collaborate and partner and be a catalyst for larger food system change. So I'll talk more about some of those examples and some of the work we're doing in a little bit. Hand it over back to Angela.
So in this hybrid presentation workshop, you'll see what I mean a little bit. The goals for our hour together are to shift the focus from individuals to larger systemic issues that cause poverty, and to leave with a few ideas for action. We really want to connect, that there's something that we can do about this. Before we go into that, I want us to connect with each other a little bit. So turn to someone that you don't know already and share your name, the work that you do, what brought you to the conference today, and what brought you to this workshop. Why is getting at the root something that's on your mind or that you want to learn more about? All right? So we have a lot of good folks in the room today. A reminder that in this session we're not all going to agree on this. This is a perspective, and what we do agree on is that there's an issue, that we care, that we want to do something about it, and we need to be creative. We need to be creative in coming up with real lasting solutions. And so this is hopefully a perspective that will support us in moving in that direction. I want to ask someone to read a story. If there's someone that could come up here and read a story, or say it loudly from where you're at, you've got to volunteer. Yay. And for Yana.
Jay is a 14-year-old ninth grader in a public school in a small Vermont town. It's midweek and Jay comes to school extremely tired. He was up late last night before taking care of his siblings while his mom was working her second job, which she recently got help to cover the bills. Since Jay's dad is incarcerated, the family has needed to spend additional money for visits and for phone calls from the prison. And on top of that, paying the basic bills on one person's income. Because food is the only optional budget item, and Jay's mom refuses to go to the food shelf, Jay has been going to bed hungry lately. In the cafeteria, Jay went without lunch again. Even though he qualifies for free lunch, he learned early in the year that older kids picked on free lunch kids, so he stopped getting lunch instead of buying bags of chips with any change he can find. In English class, Jay's group is supposed to give a presentation. When the teacher calls on his group, Jay is sleeping. His head is on his desk. This is the second time this week the teacher has had to wake Jay up, and she's feeling annoyed because this disrupts the class. This is also the second time she is sending Jay to the assistant principal. The other students in Jay's group are frustrated because the presentation is a big part of their grade, and Jay isn't prepared to do his part.
Thanks, Kiana. Can you relate to this story? Yeah, this is a story that is happening right now, today, right? And it happens over and over again. And so often, what happens in this story when this is happening to someone like Jay, the attention is on Jay. Why is he sleeping in class? We work to support Jay. Why isn't he eating food at lunch? Right? What's wrong with Jay that he's not doing these things? And so we're going to take this, we're going to use this session to go below the water. We're going to use an iceberg image to look below the surface of the water. Instead of just spending time looking at what's going on that we can see, we're going to look at what we can't see. Okay? So I'm going to ask for your thoughts, right? First, what's happening above the water? What's the tip of the iceberg? What can we see? Jay's tired.
Jay's hungry.
Jay's hungry.
He's embarrassed.
Embarrassed.
Maybe acting out.
Acting out.
Not participating in class.
We see that he's not participating.
Jay's worried.
You can see the worry.
He's getting ridiculed.
He's getting ridiculed. Trouble with peers.
He stands out because he's the only one sleeping.
He stands out and gets singled out. Yeah.
His emotional pools are filled.
Emotional pools are filled.
All of his basic needs are, between stress and sleep deprivation, are filled up, so he doesn't have anything left over.
Yeah. Yep. Those are all great examples. These are things that we can see, maybe, maybe not. Depends on some of the lenses we're using and how we're seeing that. What's going on below the water? What are some of the cultural, these are the three ways I would talk about what's going on below the water. One is cultural beliefs and values. Another is institutional impacts or structural, and another is systemic. What are some things that you think are happening that are below the water?
Women's wages are lower than men's.
Women's wages lower than men's. Yep. What is it now? 65 cents to the dollar? Is that right?
74.
74?
His behavior is seen as a behavior problem, not a health problem. So he's sent to the assistant principal as opposed to the nurse.
So a cultural belief that acting out is a behavior problem. It's
Yeah,
not
and
linked to.
systemic and institutional. I don't know what category.
Yeah, they're really all connected. They touch on all of them, right? Behavior problem. And a behavior problem is addressed through punishment, often, right? Punitive.
I just want to add to the first one, not only are women's wages depressed, but everyone's wages are depressed. And also you have the problem where people are acting as individual contractors because you don't have any kind of union membership, it has been on the decline.
Unions on decline, low wages.
The cost of living's higher.
Cost of living is higher. Yep.
I think this is an institutional one. It sounds like the way the lunch program was set up, it was clear to the other students who was getting the free lunch and who was not. So there's some sort of process thing there that was creating a culture of shaming or stigmatizing. Yeah.
Yep. Culture of shame around food. Same, his mom isn't going to the food shelf. We can see there that there might be some shame issues there as well, right?
Being poor is a punishable offense.
We're punishing people for being poor. So what's an institution that is
Incarceration.
incarceration? We have, 40 years ago, 300,000 people incarcerated. Today we have 2 million people incarcerated. Up to 7 million people on the parole system, right? So.
Yes, we're talking here about symptoms, but the real causes are the political, economic, and religious power structures that have consolidated their power, leading us to believe that there isn't enough to go around. And in order for them to stay in power, they're using the oldest tactic in the world, divide and conquer.
Yep. So scarcity, divide and conquer, and consolidation of power among a very few people. Of consolidation of wealth and power, right?
Yes, political, economic, and religious power structures have the world so divided now.
Yeah. Let's hear from someone else and then we'll come back to you. Yeah.
The lack of adequate childcare.
Lack of adequate childcare. So basic needs not being seen as rights, right? The childcare costs are through the roof. Same with, what's another need? Food. Cost of food is through the roof. Housing, right? So basic needs not seen as rights. They're seen as if you make enough, then you deserve. So what's that connected to? What's a cultural belief that we have that's connected to?
That if you work hard, you get what you
Yeah, meritocracy. Hard work equals success. And do we know people who are working really hard and still having to go to the food shelf? Absolutely. Yeah. So the food shelf is, was started off as an emergency measure, and it's really, it's a stopgap because we have so much going on here under the water that more and more people are impacted, and they're having to get that emergency food, even though they are working hard. So that's what we have going on. Great example. Today I want to go into some of just setting the stage. You've probably had this in your other workshops today, but I just want to make sure it's in the room. 15% of Americans are living below the federal poverty line. That's 12,000 for a single adult and 24,000 for a family of 4. In Vermont, it's 11.8%. But if you take into account demographics, a single mom with kids under 5, 53% are living in poverty. 15% of children under 18 in Vermont are below the federal poverty line. And I want to contrast that with the livable wage. Vermont did a report looking at what is actually a livable wage, just what do Vermonters need to cover their basic needs. It's $33,000 for a single adult, and $80,000 for a family of 4. So there's a big difference between $24,000 and $80,000, right? And we're a family. We have 2 little kids, family of 4, and to imagine living on $24,000 it's wow, and 80,000. That's not a. I wish we had 80,000. Maybe we could buy a house, or start a college fund or something, And whenever we talk about this, we have to add a racial lens. People of color are impacted in a much more severe way by poverty and hunger because of the historical reality of slavery, of genocide, of land theft. So while overall there are more white people living in poverty, there are people of color are disproportionately affected. So when you disaggregate for race, it's 9% of white folks, 26% for Hispanic folks, and 27% for Black or African American. Yeah.
I know that there's a statistic that it's for poverty for African Americans, children 6 and under is 43%.
Yeah. Yep. 43%. Yep. Housing is a very real need in Vermont. Right, we're 45th in the nation. For 100 units that are needed, there are only 48 available. That means there's 52 families or individuals that are sleeping on couches and homeless shelters, moving from apartment to apartment to try and stay housed, staying at Super 8, Motel 6. Food, 1 in 5 kids food insecure in Vermont. Jobs, 29% of kids are living in families where no parent had regular full-time employment. Has anyone here ever been unemployed? Is that stressful or what? It's stressful, and so that stress. It's not just the stress of hunger; it's the stress of finding housing and jobs. It's really impacting families. So we spend a lot of time talking about the down. We talk about those numbers that I just went over. We may have heard numbers like that often. What we don't often get to hear is so where's the up? If there's all this down, where's the up? There's a missing piece in the puzzle. So we're going to watch a video, and then we're going to talk some more. Wealth Inequality in America. Cassie, do you want to turn the light on?
There's a chart I saw recently that I can't get out of my head. There's a chart I saw recently that I can't get out of my head. A Harvard business professor and economist asked more than 5,000 Americans how they thought wealth was distributed in the United States. This is what they said they thought it was. Dividing the country into 5 rough groups of the top, bottom, and middle 3 20% groups, they asked people how they thought the wealth in this country was divided. Then he asked them what they thought was the ideal distribution. And 92%, that's at least 9 out of 10 of them, said it should be more like this. In other words, more equitable than they think it is. Now that fact is telling, admittedly, the notion that most Americans know that the system is already skewed unfairly. But what's most interesting to me is the reality compared to our perception. The ideal is as far removed from our perception of reality as the actual distribution is from what we think exists in this country. So ignore the ideal for a moment. Here's what we think it is again. And here is the actual distribution. Shockingly skewed. Not only do the bottom 20% and the next 20%, the bottom 40% of Americans barely have any of the wealth. I mean, it's hard to even see them on the chart. But the top 1% has more of the country's wealth than 9 out of 10 Americans believe the entire top 20% should have. Mind-blowing. But let's look at it another way, because I find this chart kind of difficult to wrap my head around. Instead, let's reduce the 311 million Americans to just a representative 100 people. Make it simple. Here they are: teachers, coaches, firefighters, construction workers, engineers, doctors, lawyers, some investment bankers, a CEO, maybe a celebrity or two. Now let's line them up according to their wealth. Poorest people on the left, wealthiest on the right, just a steady row of folks based on their net worth. We'll color code them like we did before, based on which 20% quintile they fall into. Now let's reduce the total wealth of the United States, which was roughly $54 trillion in 2009, to this symbolic pile of cash. And let's distribute it among our 100 Americans. Well, here's socialism, all the wealth of the country distributed equally. We all know that won't work. We need to encourage people to work and work hard to achieve that good old American dream and keep our country moving forward. So, here's that ideal we asked everyone about. Something like this curve. This isn't too bad. We've got some incentive, as the wealthiest folks are now about 10 to 20 times better off than the poorest Americans. But hey, even the poor folks aren't actually poor, since the poverty line has stayed almost entirely off the chart. We have a super healthy middle class with a smooth transition into wealth. And yes, Republicans and Democrats alike chose this curve. 9 out of 10 people, 92%, said this was a nice, ideal distribution of America's wealth. But let's move on. This is what people think America's wealth distribution actually looks like. Not as equitable, clearly, but for me, even this still looks pretty great. Yes, the poorest 20 to 30% are starting to suffer quite a lot compared to the ideal, and the middle class is certainly struggling more than they were, while the rich and wealthy are making roughly 100 times that of the poorest Americans, and about 10 times that of the still healthy middle class. Sadly, this isn't even close to the reality. Here is the actual distribution of wealth in America. The poorest Americans don't even register. They're down to pocket change. And the middle class is barely distinguishable from the poor. In fact, even the rich between the top 10 and 20 percentile are worse off. Only the top 10% are better off. And how much better off? So much better off that the top 2 to 5% are actually off the chart at this scale. And the top 1%, this guy, well, his stack of money stretches 10 times higher than we can show. Here's his stack of cash, restacked, all by itself. This is the top 1% we've been hearing so much about. So much green in his pockets that I have to give him a whole new column of his own, because he won't fit on my chart. 1% of America has 40% of all the nation's wealth. The bottom 80%, 8 out of every 10 people, or 80 out of these 100, only has 7% between them. And this has only gotten worse in the last 20 to 30 years. While the richest 1% take home almost a quarter of the national income today, in 1976, they took home only 9%, meaning their share of income has nearly tripled in the last 30 years. The top 1% own half the country's stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. The bottom 50% of Americans own only 0.5% of these investments, which means they aren't investing. They're just scraping by. I'm sure many of these wealthy people have worked very hard for their money, but do you really believe that the CEO is working 380 times harder than his average employee? Not his lowest paid employee, not the janitor, but the average earner in his company. The average worker needs to work more than a month to earn what the CEO makes in 1 hour. We certainly don't have to go all the way to socialism to find something that is fair for hardworking Americans. We don't even have to achieve what most of us consider might be ideal. All we need to do is wake up and realize that the reality in this country is not at all what we think it is.
So why are people hungry?
People are talking a
We've
lot
got-
about inequality
we're
these
gonna,
days, about the fact
let's do that. Technology, where do I go?
Slideshow.
We're going to talk in pairs right now. We don't have time to do that, but you know, this video, I've watched it many times. I've shown it to a lot of different groups. It has a really it has an impact, I think, in ways that other information we receive doesn't have. You may have heard this before. This is, you know, inequality is getting a lot of attention these days. But it's a pretty serious thing. It's impacting all of us, and we can do something about it. We have to shift our attention. A lot of attention really goes to the tip of the iceberg, and we can shift our attention to below the iceberg while really supporting Jay and other people like him. In a situation that's really challenging, right? You know, I'm just going to go through this part quickly. We hear that the poor are lazy, that they make poor choices, that poverty or hunger are caused by drug abuse, which really, based on research, touches people of all class incomes and wealth. Or we think people are poor because of chronic illness or divorce or because they're laid off work. All those things contribute. Policies also contribute. Welfare, Reach Up just recently had huge cuts, right? Money is continually cut to people. Tax code, I'll just read a statistic. 1980 Vermont corporate taxes were 11.5% of Vermont income, state income, and now they're 6.5%. At the same time, people in Vermont are paying higher taxes, right? This phenomenon that we saw in the video, this is not, Vermont is not immune to this phenomenon, right? The Public Assets Institute has the State of Working Vermont report. Their 2015 report clearly shows that the wealthy in Vermont are becoming wealthier, the poor in Vermont are becoming poorer, and Vermont, the middle class in Vermont are losing ground faster than almost any other state. Peter Galbraith, state senator, has an article in Vermont Digger from February 2016 where he gives some examples of policies where the money is going to the wealthiest in Vermont. Privatization of prisons, of schools, these policies all contribute. Student debt. And the reality is that we have an economic system that allows for all of this. It's okay, it encourages it, right? So I want to encourage us to go a little bit deeper. The policies are important, but really the fundamental values of the economic system that we have are constant growth. We have to have growth for the capitalist economy to survive. Any profit that's made goes to shareholders, not to people, right? That's where that money is getting funneled all the way up to the 1%, instead of being shared by workers, people who are doing the work. And our health is measured by the gross domestic product, which, you know, things like disease and the number of people in prison, war, all of those things are contributing to what should show the health of our economy. Should be the health of our people and our earth also, right? And it doesn't do that, right? It's just purely on how much money is coming in. So we may not be able to change this economic system today, tomorrow, by ourselves, but what we can do is begin to shift from putting so much time, energy, resources hear and begin to connect to what's going on under the water. And shifting the blame off of people, stopping, not punishing or blaming people for being poor, but working together, organizing to change these things that are impacting Jay and so many other people like him. Richard's going to talk about a few examples related to food.